through the forest and he would kill all the gnolls and put their heads on pikes, and he wanted to be the gnoll boogeyman, basically. And the young gnolls, their gruel, they would, Big Goat or Enter will come to get you. I can imagine that he turned evil, he can walk into a gnoll village, and maybe he told them to because they feared him now.
Right, that's a great example of how it actually makes sense for the henchman to follow him because he's clearly instilled such fear. I mean, maybe we could do the same thing if we look at our villain and say, okay, he's a former adventurer and all these orcs know not to mess with him, so he could sort of strong arm them. That could be kind of interesting, but your players are going to encounter those henchmen first, not the backstory of the hero. So you've got to keep in mind that a lot of your players' impressions are going to come from how or what kind of henchmen they're interacting with first, right? That's just typically the natural flow of an adventure is minions and peons first, bad guy last, right? So that will shape what your players are going to believe about the story. Did I see another hand? Yes, sir.
I was going to say, like what Chris said, when you're first looking for a villain, look towards real life or history. And so in our case, where our villain is this religious figure, well, if you just look at a couple hundred years ago, the Reformation, half of Northern Europe followed Martin Luther, right? So he doesn't necessarily have to be wrong. He's just the other side just disagrees with him, but other people are like, no, no, this is the right thing to do. So they could be clerics and devout followers of the church who are still following this guy. Now, the party has this moral question of why are we fighting these guys? Because they follow a good deity. Like I follow the same deity. What's going on here? It just adds an additional element.
Yeah, it's certainly possible that these are just like-minded individuals, right? They are people that have similar beliefs to this guy. You want to take this, Chris?
It's all right. Oh. I was just going to add that we've identified a number of toys out there that we've got to play with. One of which is the relic. And is there any monster or creature type or group that might be somehow tied to this relic that would feel a sense of loyalty to it, or is somehow connected to it, or drawn to it, or empowered by it? And could they factor into the story somehow?
Yes.
Playing on those concepts, I like the idea that there's actually two types of henchmen. There's the followers of the former adventurer that are with him wherever he's actively doing his thing. But then in the previous locations where he had used the relic, maybe the act of taking the relic away then has opened up a rift and is attracting, demons and what have you. And so now maybe he starts out as a patriot, he sends the party back there to find out what's going on with this thing and go fight those demons, and then it turns out that they find out.
You're not just dealing with his agents, you're also dealing with just the repercussions of everything he's done. So what are these demons doing here? Why are we fighting demons? What's going on? There's like a secondary problem that's been created that has to be solved, that will be solved once they take the relic out of that villain's hands, basically.
If places are being desertified, maybe it's not demonic, maybe it's elemental. Maybe suddenly there's like, I don't know, water elementals or something, which would be weird, really weird. But
Yeah, this is a good example of the next point was sort of seeking out good connections to your henchman types. This can be these can be connections that make sense in the context of sort of the larger D&D lore, like, oh, okay, ogres and orcs work together, so that's an easy connection to make. Or it could be story connections, and I really like the idea of having two kind of very different types of henchmen thrown together in the adventure because of well, these guys, they're following our villain because they have similar beliefs, and then these monstrous creatures, either elementals, demons, or whatever, are working for the villain because they're bound to the relic, right? And it creates an interesting, and strange connection between those henchmen types. Did I see another question? Yes, sir. I think this sounds like a heroic tier adventure from what we're talking about, but it could very easily be Paragon, especially if we're jumping around the nation or the land. If this is a couple of different locations we're dealing with, I could see it even sort of falling between the two, right? High heroic, low Paragon, because this is kind of a local threat, but it's local to several different places. So I think that's what we're looking at, maybe. Yeah. Yes, sir.
It's actually played really well into the workshop I had yesterday on monster building. One of the tips was take two totally disconnected things, and drawing a line between the two is where you find most interest. I think trying to find how this former hero that everyone loves and knows about would all of a sudden have these demon bad guys following. That's actually really good.
All right, this actually ties into the next point I was going to talk about a little bit. It's really good to use variety in your henchmen and your monsters, but make sure that it makes sense in the context of the story. I think we've all designed that adventure that you go into the dungeon and all right, now you're fighting Aarakocra. Now you're fighting Baelors, right? And basically, just going through the monster manual and picking out random things. I, I think your adventures make more sense to your players when there's a good variety of villains to face or of monsters to face, but that eventually they can uncover some story reason why they're working together. It sounds like we're building towards that with this idea of the relic and either elementals or demons, but it's a good way to create sort of variety in your encounters without making it feel like you just threw a dart at a board covered in monster names and designed your encounters based on that, which I've never done. But yes.
One thing I'll do is I'll restrict myself to a certain kind of monster. Like my main campaign is heroes who are dealing with the undead. So most of what they're dealing with are either high level undead or they're minions who are all undead in some way. There's a lot of variety within there.
Yeah, doing your variety and picking your henchmen by type is typically pretty good. It gets a little weird when you deal with the humanoids because there's so much variety in the humanoids. I mean, orcs and gnolls and goblins and humans and elves and dwarves all fall under that humanoid category. But I mean, aberrations, for example, that's the one where you can plausibly have lots of different kinds of aberrations working together, and it makes sense in the context of the story. So definitely a good place to start. But you don't actually have to limit yourself to that, as we've been talking about. We could have humanoids and elemental creatures working together for some reason. You just got to make sure there's a story reason, and you have to make sure that the players can find that story reason. Yes.
Do we have to have it that the ex-hero is actually controlling these other enemies, or was the relic somehow keeping them away and now they're just out there and they're out of control?
Well, you don't have to do anything, but I'm not going to come to your house and make you. Chris will. But I think I think that to plausibly have your henchmen of such different types working together and cooperatively, you would want to make it so that the villain is in control in some way. If you want these two types of henchmen to be in conflict with one another, which can be interesting as well, they could be incidental. So it really, this is one that could go either way, right? Or yeah, exactly, right. It could be that this relic rebukes the demons or monsters and doesn't necessarily control them, but sort of forces them away. It really just depends on how you want your henchmen to interact with one another. And likewise, just like your villain, you need to make your henchmen's motivations clear, right? Why are these humanoids, these dwarves and elves working with our villain? Well, they follow his beliefs. Just make sure your players know that, right? Why are these demons here? Well, it's because the relic is attracting them or no longer keeping them away. You just have to communicate that information to your players in some way. Just like with story, though, your players are going to be interacting directly with these henchmen, usually at sword point, but also sometimes through negotiation, skills, etc. When the players take actions, the henchmen are just as effective as the story, right? If you kill a bunch of these adventurers that are former followers of the adventurer, they're going to start falling back to defensive positions. They're going to start running for help, etc. So for your players to feel like they're having an impact on the adventure, your henchmen need to react just as well as the story and the villain do.
The only thing I would add to that is, as you're building your adventure, look for opportunities to sort of shake things up. Not every henchman, for instance, is going to fight to the death. You could throw the characters for a bit of a loop if one of the henchmen surrenders, or if a character does something noble that this henchman kind of responds to in a weird way and might decide, okay, maybe I'm on the wrong side. I wouldn't want to do that with every single henchman. Too much shades of gray gets under the player's skin after a while. Sometimes they just want to kill stuff, and that's good. That's what D&D is largely about. But once in a while, just throwing them a bit of a curve, a henchman who's got something going on under the skin that's a little bit different from the others can often open up some interesting role-playing opportunities, and also let the players feel like they're accomplishing something different.
All right, I'm going to run through this relatively quickly. Basically, here's just some simple advice on designing encounters. I've broken it down into combat encounters and non-combat encounters, but there will be some things that overlap between the two. Make sure when you design an encounter that it serves some purpose in the story. Roadblock encounters or stumbling block encounters that are simply there to provide your players with a little bit more XP to get them a little bit get them closer to the next level can often feel extraneous and slow down the game and disrupt the pacing of the game. Right? If your players can't see that this encounter has some reason for being there, it's going to feel like you're just throwing monsters at them and slowing them down, right? So try and make sure that each of your encounters has a reason for being there and also serves some purpose of the story, moves the story forward in some way. It's a good idea to break up combat encounters, maybe physically break them up so that there are other encounters physically between them. If I have 5 fights with orcs in a row, that's going to be a little difficult and dull. But if I have a fight with orcs and then I have an exploration encounter where I'm looking around in a room and uncovering, hidden compartments and things like that, and then I have another encounter with orcs, that sort of gives the adventure a little bit of pacing that allows your players to sort of reach those highs of excitement in the combat encounter and then come back down for the non-combat encounter. So I would say just make sure that you have a good, give your players a little respite from combat encounters every now and then. This is something that is probably goes without saying, but it's okay to have encounters that are too easy. It's okay to have the encounter that is there's 2 henchmen guarding a door, and the players can either trick them or fall upon them and attack them and take them out really easily. Not every encounter has to be an hour-long knockdown, drag-out fight, especially if you want it to be something that the players can solve creatively, right? If the players see that the room is guarded by, 6 soldiers, they might be tempted to say, okay, well, we're going to have to go fight those soldiers. But if they see that the room is guarded by 2 soldiers, then maybe the players start thinking, okay, well, can we sneak in? Or is there a way we can knock these guys out? Or can I distract that guy while you sneak in the window or something like that? And, they may just say, hey, there's only 2 of them. We can kick their asses. So it's okay, it's okay. Not every single encounter you put in an adventure has to be the full size encounter. In fact, I think it's actually good for pacing if there's occasionally a few that they go pretty quickly. And this is just a little bit of encounter advice that I like to throw out there. Elites and solos should probably be used sparingly. They often take a lot of the DM's attention and last a long time. I like to use more minions than a lot of people do because they provide targets, but they go down quickly. There's not a lot of tracking involved with them. Elites and solos often tend to stick around for a while, throw out a lot of conditions, have a lot of recharge powers, etc. So it also helps to reinforce the importance of a particular monster or villain when you make them an elite or a solo. And we've already talked about this, but lieutenants and major henchmen, sort of your big high-level henchmen, they're a great way to indicate this is where the story point is. Chris was talking about Prismius earlier, the sort of lieutenant to the tiefling crime lord Zybon. And whenever we would have an encounter with Prismius, we sort of knew, okay, this guy isn't just one of the Horned Alliance lackeys, right? He's not just another guy. There's some important information to be gleaned from our encounter with this guy. So it's sort of a subtle, I don't want to say subconscious indicator, but when your players encounter a lieutenant, that's a really good way to get them to pay attention to what's going on.